Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. On behalf of Asian Development Bank, we wish to extend a warm welcome to all the participants for this COP26 side event on scaling up finance and innovation in climate resilient agri-food systems. This event is being organized as part of the Resilience Hub for Southeast Asia and East Asia. So there are more than 100 events within this Resilience Hub. You are welcome to watch either online or in person or even online, because there will be recordings available. So I am Srinivasan Ancha, Principal Climate Change Specialist and the Climate Change Focal Point for Southeast Asia Department of ADB. And I have pleasure to moderate this session today. As you all know, this event will be recorded and made available for viewing later on at the Resilience Hub website. And we request you to post your comments or questions in the chat box. And if it is a query specific to a particular panel member, please address that panel member in your chat, in the chat box. And please mute your microphone when you are not speaking for the event. So I think nowadays, because we have been through this Zoom for so long, I think we don't need to make aware of these rules, everybody. But we are very, very thankful to you for attending this early in the morning. And we hope to get we hope to learn a lot from this short side event from our panel members. We have a distinguished panel members. Actually, there are 5. First, Dr. Phuong Parisak Prawong Viengkham. He is the advisor to the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry of Lao PDR. And he previously worked as the Deputy Minister of the Ministry for a long time, for more than 10 years. And he was also the lead negotiator and champion for promoting cross-border agricultural trade facilitation within ASEAN and +3. Then we have Dr. Suryan Vichitlekar. He is the Executive Director of Mekong Institute. He also has substantial experience in agriculture and rural development, public-private partnerships, and also trade facilitation in the GMS and Southeast Asia. Then we have another panel member, Ms. Olga Bhutto. She is the Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction Specialist working with Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Then we have Dr. Fong Nguyen. He is the Director of Agriculture and Rural Information Center at the Institute of Policy and Strategy for Agriculture and Rural Development in Vietnam. Finally, we have Mr. Harsh Vivek. He is the Program Leader for the South Asia Food and Agribusiness Advisory Services at the International Finance Corporation. So as you can see, we have a wide range of participants, panel members with rich experience. So I think we can learn a lot. So before I request the panel members to provide their insights, I will briefly introduce the topic to set the scene and to show why this topic is very important in the context of ongoing international climate negotiations in Glasgow. We all know we are passing through a difficult phase. There are several waves of COVID-19 already. And in addition, we also have extreme climate events in most of the countries. So this is actually COVID-19 is exacerbating the vulnerability of our agri-food systems, which are already facing a challenge from extreme climate events. And if we are to realize our goal of reducing global ending hunger by 2030 in a climate-friendly manner, we need a lot to do. And actually, in that context, Asian Development Bank and International Food Policy Research Institute conducted a study in 2009, actually about 12 years ago. How can we really build climate resilience in Asian agriculture, Asia-Pacific agriculture, and what it would take in terms of either finance or technologies, etc. At that time, there was an estimate, it was a preliminary estimate that we need at least $3.5 billion only for adaptation of agriculture to climate change in Asia and Pacific. But of course, since then, the lot of improvements have happened in how we calculate climate finance, and both in terms of the needs and also in terms of climate flows. There is a recent estimate by the Climate Policy Initiative. They have come up with figures, 2019 and 2020 average they took, and the total global climate finance flow is around $632 billion. And what they mentioned is, if we really want to make progress, the $632 billion globally should increase to $4.13 trillion by 2030. So what we are looking at in about 9 years, this should go by almost, you can say, almost 7 or 8 times. So, which is a phenomenal growth required for the climate finance. Interestingly, of the global climate finance of 632 billion, only 14 billion, or just about 3%, is going into agriculture, forestry, and land use. Out of this $14 billion, about 8 billion to mitigation, 4 billion to adaptation, and about 2 billion to both mitigation and adaptation and other multiple activities. So as you can see, the overall out of $632 billion, only 46 billion is going to adaptation, and only 14 billion, and out of again, only 4 billion is going to adaptation of agriculture and forestry and land use, etc. So the needs for adaptation finance also are estimated within agriculture, almost $180 billion. So as you can see, we are at 4, and we must be having $180 billion per year if we want to address impacts of climate change in agriculture sector or agri-food systems. So IFAD has come up with a new study. They are also saying it's less than 2% of the climate finance is actually reaching small-scale farmers in developing countries. So the same situation happens in relation to flow of technologies into agriculture and agri-food value chains. So the panel session today, or the side event today, is very important from that angle. This is not only important just because of finance and technologies. This is important in the context of aligning our agri-food value chain to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Currently, our agri-food systems are not aligned fully with the Paris Agreement. They are not on a pathway compatible with the Paris Agreement. So if we just continue the business as usual scenario, the emissions from agriculture food value chains itself can be as high as 50% of the total emissions by 2050. So even if we reduce or eliminate all emissions from all sectors like energy, transport, etc., if we don't do much in agriculture, we will not be achieving the goal of 1.5 degrees temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. So that is why this event is very important to really understand what else can be done. And in terms of Paris Agreement, we all know that there is a Article 7 of the Paris Agreement, which is aiming at the global goal on adaptation. And when we say this global goal on adaptation, of course, agriculture and food industry, food systems, agri-food systems, these play a paramount role. And unless they adapt, all other systems actually, fare little. So more importantly, actually, in the recent nationally determined contributions of various countries, more than 90 countries, actually, 90% of the countries that submitted NDCs, they recognized agriculture as a key sector, and that must, and they are looking for support. The sector is looking for support to reduce the vulnerability through climate finance, technology, and capacity building. So in the UNFCCC, they started some work on agriculture under the climate change sometime in 2017. This is called Coronavia Joint Work on Agriculture. And they initially set a deadline of 2020, but now because the last year COP was not held because of COVID-19, now they are really looking at the progress during this COP. They are going to assess what progress has happened under this Coronavia Joint Work on Agriculture under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This joint work actually is focusing on soils, nutrient use, water, livestock, and also adaptation and also socio-economic and food security dimensions of climate change across all agricultural sectors. So all in all, I wish to say that our discussions today are going to be relevant for the international climate negotiations and also for various international financing mechanisms that support agriculture. We know that there is a Green Climate Fund, there's climate investment funds and the pilot program for climate resilience, Adaptation Fund, GEF, Global Environment Facility, and several other funds. But we all know that although there are varying range of funds, but the amount of funds available for adaptation to climate change in agriculture sector is still very limited, as I mentioned earlier. So with that background, now I would like to request our panel members to reflect on some of these issues. First, I would like to request Dr. Parisak. Dr. Parisak, you have been the Vice Minister for Lao PDR for a long time with the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and you have been a champion in terms of addressing impacts of climate change in agriculture. But we all know that like any other country in the region, Lao PDR is also highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change. And now the current COVID-19 is really exacerbating that effect. And it caused severe value chain disruptions and also caused some unemployment, etc. So from your point of view, now the international negotiations are going on in Glasgow on climate change and climate finance. And so what are your expectations and what should be done to channel more climate finance to agriculture? If I may request you. Dr. Parisak, please. Oh, you are muted, Dr. Parisak. Your microphone.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Srini. First, allow me to thank ADB for the opportunity to be part of this important event under the banner of COP26. And as far as Laos is concerned, with regard to COP26, ASEAN has had its meeting last week, its summit, and we have came up with a common stance on addressing the set target discussed at COP26. Of course, the most important being a net zero emission of carbon before 2050. But as far as ASEAN, most countries are concerned, the big issue here is more on deforestation, forest loss associated with agriculture, commodity production, and trade. So this is to reduce methane, of course. So the big issue for ASEAN is really this one. I fully agree with you as far as our economy is concerned. We had a severe hit. GDP stands at 3%. We're having our National Assembly meeting. The target was 4.7 early this year. But for the agriculture sector, even though we had big floods in 2018, 2019, but we're not doing that bad. There were major disruption from COVID last year, the year before. But after that, because we are more subsistence and food security have been maintained. And this year also, we will experience a very good record in food production. And the other thing is for export of commodity, it remained pretty high. 90% of pre-pandemic target. So the agriculture export in the region, especially to China, 80%, stands around 1 billion US dollars. What does it mean? It means that there's still income going to the rural area, providing a stable livelihood. Of course, there's still disruption, but we're not doing that bad. Now, how can this happen under COVID? Well, ASEAN has come in agreement, so we have to live with COVID. It has to be a new normal. So we have continued on our ASEAN economic integration, especially on connectivity among each other, and especially with the +3 and China. So before, I explained to you that we have something called the cross-border value chain, the production and trade, especially with China, Vietnam, and with Thailand. And this is important. This has maintained the momentum, and not only maintaining the momentum, but it has provided to a large extent for the financial resources from FDI, foreign direct investment. Now we have more quality FDI because we have came up with new laws and rules, to reduce chemicals, and we have adhered to more good agriculture practices and using other standards also, like GI, like organic. Okay, so FDI investment is very important, not only for the agriculture commodity, but also for the forestry sector. So FDI is going to the Lao private sector, Lao small farmers. And for forestry, for example, we have allowed the private sector to undertake plantation in protected area, which is 50%. And they're getting most money from the region, especially China. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of US dollars. So this is the big source of financing for a country like ours. And of course, for most ASEAN countries also, we have something called GMS, so we continue along this line. Now, the other source is the SME financial support. We're getting this from the commercial banks, ours, and also with the help of the international partners like yourself, ADB. But this is small. So I'm talking about the small funds, 50,000, 200,000 per groups of farmers, very small, and not easy to access because they have extremely complicated rules and regulation. It's like putting a big barrier. They're saying they're promoting the small farmer, but they're doing exactly the opposite. So it's not very attractive to the farmers at all. The other initiative, we're trying this out with you guys, that is called the matching grant and matching loan. This is pretty good. World Bank is doing that with ADB, providing around 50–60%, partial investment. This is a good model, and we would like to expand on that. It's much better than SME. So we have to try to continue to move along this line. But the problem is, I'm sorry to say this, Srini, you guys are too demanding in terms of strict compliance with rigid environmental and social targets and rules, and this is not not very attractive side, of this fund. So there's a lot of fund coming. So hopefully we can bring them, to spur more on FDI investment, and especially on this matching loans and grants. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, this is encouraging to know that there is some finance flowing, but of course more is needed. And also you talked more in terms of the food production side. Now I would like to request Dr. Suryan more in terms of the agri-food processing side. Thailand is a leader in the region in agri-food processing, and COVID-19 also caused some disruptions. But at the same time, Thai government is spending a lot of money through COVID-19 stimulus packages. And we have looked at the amounts going into agri-food sector. We feel that it's not going enough. I mean, in terms of really to improve the agri-food processing and to improve the resilience of the agri-food processing sector. So on this, do you have any particular thoughts? I mean, how international climate finance can really address this important component, because processing is also a very, very important component of the food value chain.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sini, and good morning, everyone. I would like to thank ADB for organizing this and providing me an opportunity to share view in this side event. I would like just to put into a broader context, not only in terms of processing, so that we can really see agri-food systems as a whole. And just to start with, I would like just to again make use of this opportunity to really demonstrate the close link between agri-food system and climate change. And I think climate change does provide impact to agriculture, and that is basically producing food for everyone. So this is equally important that I would like the event to recognize. Then in terms of maintain functionality of food system, from production, from processing, trading until the consumer, one also need to understand that each one of us has role to play. From the production side, I think we have quite certain technology that has been already developed, a number of adaptation technology, mitigation technology already developed under the so-called climate smart agriculture. You can name, for example, the use of appropriate variety of seed or crop, using crop diversification, using alternate wetting and drying in case of rice planting. All of this are available. The issue is not the technology per se. The technology, the issue is more on adoption, also incentive. There's still much for us to work in support of the farmers, for them to understand the co-benefit between production on one side, or the other side is to help reduce the climate of impact of climate change, and also help to reduce methane emission. So I think we also would need to look into how the adoption could be possibly made. And I would like just to mention three brief points. One is about we still need to work on farmers group strengthening, because only working as a group, they will be able to be properly supported. The government and private sector can work with them, not on individual basis. We need to look into a more viable climate smart agriculture model, and also scalable, because many cases climate smart technology, if you look into individual practices, this will not be able to multiply. And without proper multiplication, then we will not be able to see impact. Next is on inclusive value chain. Farmers alone cannot achieve this. They need to be included into the value chain, supported by value chain actor. So if this particular COP26 would be able to do something in order to maintain this food system functionality, I would propose the following four. One is that there should be a recognition that climate change and food systems are closely interrelated. We cannot pick one without the other, and therefore food systems also provide an entry point of achieving a sustainable development goal. And I would believe that if we keep echoing this important, it will be very important. Second, financing is already there, but we need to look into how financing is put into use where it is needed. Dr. Sini, you already point out the percentage and so on and so forth. We hope to see the investment into a more scalable project supporting climate smart agriculture value chain. And I'm talking about value chain here so that all the stakeholders in the value chain will be participated and receive benefit. I also would like private sector to come in and support this. And hopefully they can help to find way to bear the cost of certification of standard. This is oftentimes is a big barrier for the farmers to be able to implement because they already put effort in doing climate smart agriculture. But if the cost is to be borne by them in terms of certification and proof, then of course it will not be easy for them to do that. Last but not the least, I hope that the audience would also see themselves as also a consumer that make the choice of preferred climate smart, sustainable product to make the difference. So these are some points I would like to put forth for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suryan. I mean, the point you mentioned on consumer choice, this is very important. I mean, in terms of agri-food systems, we know that there is so much also wastage. Almost 1/3 of the food produced is getting wasted or lost in the value chain. So this is an important area, and that is being also discussed as part of this climate negotiations. Now I'd like to request Ms. Volga. FAO has recently published a report, Climate Finance in Agriculture and Land Use Sector, Global and Regional Trends between 2000 and 2018. And you're one of the key authors. So can you please elaborate findings from the study and how Asia is benefiting in general? And if there are any specific findings focusing on Southeast Asia, we'd like to know, especially on adaptation finance or overall climate finance in agriculture, food industry.
Yes,
Ms. Volga, please.
you. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Srini, and thank you for providing us this opportunity to share findings of our research and our views on this topic. First of all, I would like to mention that we based our research on the data made available by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and it's a climate-related development finance database, which is open source, and it includes data on climate-related allocations from bilateral, multilateral, and some of the private resource partners. The focus of our research was agriculture and land use sector, and we defined it by using the creditor reporting system codes that classify the technical purpose of the climate finance. One of the main key messages at the global scale was that the total climate finance to the agriculture and land use sector between 2000 and 2018 amounted to $122 billion. And the second important point was that the share of agriculture and land use sector within the climate finance to all sectors has decreased, and from about 45% at the beginning of 2000 and reaching to 24% in 2013, where it stayed until now. When we look at the Asia region specifically, it received, according to our estimations, 39.5 billion of climate finance to the agriculture and land use sector in the period assessed.
Volga, your camera is not on. If you wish to switch on camera.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, good.
All right. Yeah, so when we look at the Asia region specifically, it received 39.5 billion of allocations of climate finance to agriculture and land use sector. And when we look at it at the share of it within the climate finance to all sectors in Asia, It also has decreased from the beginning of 2000, where it was around 48%, and in 2018 it was around 19%. When we zoom in to the East Asia region, we found that it received around 19.3 billion of climate finance to agriculture and land use sector. And when it comes to the climate objective of this funding in East Asia, the largest share of funding, about 47%, were targeting mitigation activities. The adaptation activities received about 33% of funds, and the rest was allocated to the adaptation and mitigation, which is called it's a kind of joint terminology, which projects which could not be assigned to any specific objective. In total, the East Asia countries received about 6.4 billion of climate finance to adaptation in agriculture and land use sector in the assessed period. And when we look specifically at the adaptation finance and the recipients of it in the East, among the East Asia, among the countries in the East Asia, we found that there are 5 main recipients which received around 90% of all climate finance in the agriculture and land use sector, and those were Indonesia, China, Vietnam, Philippines, and Cambodia. So I hope this gives a brief overview, and with this I give the floor over to the moderator.
I mean, this is very useful. Actually, you have put a nice picture. I mean, still the amounts are so low. Even in East Asia, $6.4 billion over a period of 18 years is really not at all adequate to meet the climate challenge. So now let us talk to Dr. Fong from Vietnam. And Dr. Fong, I mean, continuing on the same dialogue, I mean, what are Vietnam's expectations? I mean, Dr. Parisak had briefly mentioned about the ASEAN discussion and preparation for the COP26 and talking about the forestry and other issues. But what are the Vietnam's expectations for climate negotiations, especially in terms of strengthening climate resilience of our agri-food systems in the region?
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, everyone. It's early morning in Vietnam now. I'm very happy to join this side event and share the information from Vietnam. So as you know, Vietnam had submitted the NDC to the UNFCCC and committed to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 9% compared to the business as usual scenarios by 2030. And its number will be increased to 27%, 3 times higher with the international supports. And you know that in the last Sunday, the Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính of Vietnam already said that at COP26 that Vietnam is targeting the carbon emission neutrally by 2050, but with the condition that we need the support funds, technology transfer, and expertise from global partners and investors to achieve that ambitious clean energy targets. And you know that in the last few years, in the context of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, Vietnam agriculture has proven to be a crisis-proof sector. And we believe that it will remain important in the future that agriculture will be an economic pillar for the Vietnam. However, you know that agriculture sector, in one hand, it is adversely affected by climate change, by all the scenarios. But in the other hand, agriculture also a significant source of greenhouse gas emission, which had been accounted for about 31.6% of the total greenhouse gas emission of the countries. So to achieve that ambitious mitigation targets, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Vietnam had developed a strategy that committed to transform the food system toward a more green and more ecological agriculture, aimed to mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions. And our ministry already identified some key initiatives that Vietnam wants to cooperate with the international partners to improve the transformation of the food system to more green and ecological in the futures. The first one is we try to develop well-functioning agriculture markets and efficient supply chains to ensure that everyone has access to adequate and safe and nutritious food, particularly after the impact of COVID-19. And secondly, and more importantly, Vietnam want to promote the connectivity among the innovation network in the countries all over the world. And Vietnam hopes to be a food innovation hub in the ASEAN region. And during last couple of months, a lot of activity has been done by the Ministry of Agriculture to develop with the World Economic Forum and Grow Asia and other international partners to develop the kind of food innovation hub in Vietnam. Thirdly, we need international investing in R&D and innovation system, transferring science and technology to meet the demand of the food processing, enhancing the efficiency in food preservation, food processing, and recycling of the byproducts to reducing the food loss and waste in the food system in Vietnam. We also need to advance technology transfer to promote the climate smart agriculture in Vietnam to reduce the greenhouse gas. And the next target, next activity is to accelerate the digital transformations across the food system, from the traceability, food safety, monitoring and management, e-commerce and logistics, so on. And digital transformation now become a national strategy in Vietnam and also in agriculture sectors. So we believe that with improving the digital infrastructure and digital skills, also ensure the inclusion of the smallholder farmers in the market and global value chains.
Thank you. That's
Yes.
really nice. I mean, there are several initiatives that Vietnam is launching and probably will get benefit from this climate finance, international climate finance also, especially the initiatives on food innovation hub or digital transformation. Yes. I think this will be very important and it needs support from international partners. And now I'd like to request Harsh from International Finance Corporation. The climate investment funds has been a major source of climate finance since 2008. And one of the programs is the pilot program for climate resilience. And this is one area actually that supports agricultural adaptation to climate change. And you have a lot of experience in implementing the pilot program for climate resilience in South Asia. So I would like to know what innovations these climate investment funds through PPCR has really supported in South Asia. So any insights on that, and so that those experiences can be scaled up in future in other parts of Asia.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Srini, for giving us this opportunity to talk about the PPCR experience that we have within the IFC in South Asia. A quick word about the International Finance Corporation for the audience. IFC is part of the World Bank Group, and this is a private sector facing international financial institution working exclusively in the emerging markets. Climate change, as Srini and other speakers have already mentioned, is one of the biggest existential crises that perhaps humanity is facing in a lifetime. But it's also an enormous business opportunity. And it's especially true when it comes to looking at green growth, low carbon growth, building a new infrastructure which is climate resilient, as well as in developing adaptation. So climate change on one hand, of course, is a big threat, but also an opportunity. And I think the entire business community and stakeholders, governments have to come together to realize that that opportunity that we have at hand. As Srini rightly mentioned, the bulk of the investments that we see in climate finance are actually going towards mitigation and very few towards adaptation, and that too, very, very few in the agriculture and food systems. In 2010, 12, early part of last decade, there was this PPCR project supported through climate investment funds, which was exclusively looking at promoting climate change resilience and adaptation. And this was like the early days. Adaptation was not yet talked about in a big way during that time. But I think it had some, it was a leadership program in a way, because it was kind of ahead of the curve. We had implemented 2 programs within the IFC in South Asia, one in Nepal and one in Bangladesh, focused exclusively on the private sector and trying to unlock investments, trying to unlock climate adaptation finance, and also building capacity wherever we thought that there was a lack of capacity in adaptation. Adaptation, of course, is very critical when it comes to countries like Nepal and Bangladesh for 2 reasons. One is, A, they are extremely vulnerable to climate change, especially agriculture sector, especially the smallholder of value chains. But at the same time, the capacity or the capability to adapt is also very limited in these countries. And therefore, a lot of effort is required in terms of finance, in terms of technical assistance, in terms of capacity building to build resilience in these economies. What did the IFC do, as part of our PPCR in Nepal and Bangladesh? Very briefly, I'll touch upon that. So we covered about 5 value chains in these 2 economies. And it was an end-to-end solution in the agricultural sector, starting from agro inputs all the way to off-takers. And the idea was to demonstrate that climate business and adaptation makes business sense, both for smallholders as well as for the agribusiness companies. I wanted to just touch upon Dr. Suryan's point about adoption not happening. And what we demonstrated through our program was that if there is a business case, if you demonstrate to our smallholders, to the agribusiness companies, that by adopting resilience practices, by undertaking adaptation measures, there's actually a business case. It's either mitigating your risk through climate risk in your supply chains or in your livelihood, or it's improving your bottom line. And that becomes a real driver for some of these private sector firms to undertake adaptation initiatives. The other thing we've done was we started looking at scale. The idea was any solution that is brought to the market, if it's not scalable, if it's not replicable, then it doesn't really impact the sector at large. And there, through our program, we impacted at least a minimum of 100,000 farmers in private sector value chains. We supported 5 different agro-commodities value chains in the private sector. We looked at 2 private equity impact investment funds and built capacity to then invest in small and medium enterprises who are into climate resilient businesses in Nepal and Bangladesh. And finally, we also looked at an ecosystem approach to give a momentum to even the startups in these countries to look at improving the investor readiness to attract capital for their newer ideas that that were coming out of these economies in climate related finance. So in a nutshell, the experience was rich. Of course, it had its own challenges. We had to really work to a number of stakeholders to convince them that climate adaptation is equally important, just as climate mitigation is. But I think having implemented it over the last 10 years, we are richer, definitely in hindsight, but also we have a lot of experience to then replicate in other countries and other sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, the points that you raised, 2 points, the showing the business case for adaptation in agriculture and also looking at the scale. These 2 actually we need to continue and build on, and for a few more years, I mean for several years, I think. So this is one important thing. Now, I mean, as I mentioned in my introduction, and basically current agri-food systems are not on a pathway to meet the goals of Paris alignment, because either in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or in terms of building resilience also. So everybody says, I mean, even in COP26 also, there are so many events on the word transformation. So everybody says we should transform our agri-food systems in order to do something better in future. Now I would like to request Dr. Parisak, actually. I mean, Lao PDR, of course, is a relatively small country, and but it is investing a lot on these natural solutions, I mean, which will contribute towards the transformation in one way. So the agri-food systems, how they are transformed by, I mean, promoting organic agriculture, conservation agriculture, or regenerative agriculture, etc., in which Lao PDR is doing a lot, mainly in terms of improving quality and safety of the systems. So here again, I mean, how do you see this balance between modern green revolution oriented, energy intensive, water intensive, pesticide intensive agri-food systems versus more nature conserving food systems like organic agriculture, etc., where you are leading, I mean, in this region? So any views and where you see the role for the international climate discussions? Actually, how can they really facilitate this nature-based solutions in nature conserving food systems, I mean?
In the case of Laos, really, we have started conservation agriculture some 20 years ago with the help of our French partner, really, who started really in Vietnam and in China. But it was difficult there to implement because of the population. And then we had continued support, from our development partners. And for the case of Laos, it's relatively easy. I mean, relatively, easy, meaning that because Laos is still not intensive agriculture. We don't have green revolution here. And Laos is still endowed with rich natural resources, right? And we have found out that some 15 years ago, there was a growing demand, in natural products, especially in agrobiodiversity products. And Laos is consuming a lot of this. And also we have border trade of this, but now in the past 15 years or so, we start to concentrate on commercializing biodiversity product, using conservation agriculture, which means that no tillage, not much chemical, GAP, system and GI and things like that. So we are using these standards in most rural areas now, because the big demand, I'm not talking about in Europe, in America, or other continent, I'm talking really about the region. There's a big appetite in our neighbors. For example, our indigenous rice, right, that we produce in 2 provinces in the north now, it's all exported to Vietnam, right? And this is conservation agriculture also, that we call it the chicken rice, for example. And a lot of the coffee, the tea that we produce since the French time, from the 19th century, we didn't know that it was valuable. It was the Chinese who told us that it's very valuable. So, and with the help of the French, so we started expanding on this kind of a production, using the natural method. So it became the big sort of a commodity now. The same goes for the other product. And, but this is really only, I would say, 20 to 30% of the whole agriculture. Why? Because, as I say, it's relatively easy, but in order to do that, as Suryan was saying, I mean, you have to organize the farmers. That's not easy, because they're used to the too much natural way of doing things. And conservation agriculture, clean agriculture is not easy. I mean, you have to adhere to very strict rules and procedure, which is not easy. And to tell that to peasant, to farmer to do that, I mean, of course, in exchange to better return, So not everyone can do that. Okay, so this happens in the vicinity of big capitals for domestic production along the borders, really. So the key here is biodiversity, agro-biodiversity, and plus the technologies from the development partners. Most of the development partners now, they are promoting this, helping this. But the problem really is, as Suryan was saying, adoption. Adoption is difficult. And the other problem is it's very difficult to get funds from the banks, because the bank, they don't know anything about conservation agriculture. You see what I mean? They don't promote this because it's small scale. It's not that productive, but high value. So we are now at this stage, but we have law, we have policies to continue to move also along this line in parallel with the bigger sort of economy of scale. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, as we all know, that transformation is never easy. And same thing, nature conserving food systems are also not easy because we have a lot of demand in terms of certification and consumer quality standards, etc. But this is one area, it has a big potential because it has both mitigation benefits and also adaptation benefits. Mitigation in terms of soil carbon sequestration, adaptation in terms of really building the resilience of the entire food system itself. But as you rightly mentioned, still it is a relatively low proportion, but there is something that we need to look at. Now I'd like to address Dr. Suryan. I mean, technology you already touched upon in your earlier intervention. When we say agri-food transformation or agri-food systems transformation, definitely the issue of technology is an important thing. So in fact, international climate negotiations at COP26 in Glasgow actually are also talking about how best we can facilitate the sort of applicable technologies. So in this context, I mean, in Thailand, of course, most of the technologies are, if you talk about agri-food processing, it is all held by the private sector. So the thing is that we also need more investment into not only develop the technologies, but also they deploy the technologies. But in agri-food systems, many private sector think that it is still risky sector. So what are your views actually? Where can we make a difference? I mean, how do we want to move forward in terms of sort of incentivizing or attracting the private sector to invest more in this technological transformation that will promote adaptation to climate change in agriculture? Dr. Suryan, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sini. It is, yes, indeed, agriculture is a risky sector, noting that risks also occur at all stages of the value chain. And that's why we would need to look into the agri-food systems if we were to really maintain functionality of the food systems. So I just want to re-emphasize this point. If I can break things down into stages and look into possibility where private sector could support or address risk in this value chain or agri-food systems. First is about at the farming, the production level. I think the farmers face a lot of risk in terms of the use of agricultural inputs and so on, so forth, including the technology that help to meet the standard. But at the same time, most of countries are now facing also aging farmer, you know. So one of the areas is that if we can really look into ways where we can encourage private sector to develop a systems where we could support farmers in terms of matching agricultural input and needs and application of technologies such as farm machinery. Farm machinery is there, and oftentimes if it is organized by the farmers, it's always difficult. It's always competitive, particularly harvesting period. If we have a platform where farmers can organize themselves when they need, and how the technology provider can, or service provider can provide service. This will help to really match the service, and then the service provider will not have to going around, but using, for example, map-based systems, we could help to ensure that there is an agricultural services and machinery services match with the need of the farmers. This is still an area where we haven't seen much investment by the private sector. Many startups offer solution, digital solution, technological solution, but oftentimes it doesn't match or organize to the need of farmers. So this way, private sector is still room where it can organize this kind of platform, and where it benefits the farmers, it also benefits the technological provider. The other stage of risk of agriculture is market. Most of farmers have experience in terms of putting a lot of effort, resources, but they find it difficult to access to quality market. If we could, again, with the help of government and private sector, help to organize market, be it a physical market or virtual market, where farmers can offer their products. They do not need to really face the difficulties in identifying what are products. And even more is that if the product is predefined, this day, I think we can plan, big supermarket can really roll out their sort of product requirements so that the farmers can organize themselves to directly meet the market. This kind of virtual platform where producer and market could meet will reduce the market risk. I would like to end by my third possibility for private sector to support. That is to look into the climate risk as a whole that really provide an extreme difficulties to farmers. That is on the extreme climate event, including possibility of pest and disease outbreak. I think it's about time both government and private sector will need to look into viable insurance systems, because farmers will not be able to cope with such a vast difficulties induced by extreme climate event. This much go beyond their capacity. Organizing this kind of risk financing scheme or insurance systems will be needed in the future. This is to ensure that the farmers who are impacted by extreme climate event, at least they still can start, having an agricultural inputs and grow their crop into the next cycle. Without which, I think this will be quite difficult. These are some entry points where we would like to see private sector, of course, including in partnership with the government, to invest to address risk of the agri-food system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suryan. I think those three avenues actually that private sector needs to explore, they need to be scaled up. Actually, the point on climate risk sharing mechanisms is very important that you touched upon. Maybe I would like to ask Harsh actually, because he has been also in the private sector. And we see, as Dr. Suryan mentioned, the insurance is important, but the penetration of insurance, despite this talk on improving crop insurance, livestock insurance, or even the whole, even agri-business insurance, the penetration of insurance is still extremely limited if we look at the entire Asia. So there are the challenges both from the private sector side as well as the farmer side or the producer side. So what can be done to overcome these challenges both from the public sector and private sector, and any specific case studies that IFC can share would be appreciated.
Thank you. This is a vicious problem. The uptake of insurance, especially in the agriculture sector, especially with smallholders in the crop insurance or livestock insurance, it's a circular problem. It's a vicious problem. You can address it from a number of angles. One of them could be affordability. And we find that usually for smallholders, for livestock holders, the cost of insurance actually is quite high. And one of the reasons is that there are not many people who are also taking that insurance. And therefore, the pool of people getting insured, sharing that risk is also smaller. And why is that? One of them, of course, is affordability. So it comes back to affordability. But the other is the lack of adequate data on the ground to really assess risks. What kind of risks, climate risk, crop risk, supply chain risk, what is the business risk that is really there? What is being covered under insurance? That risk assessment is quite faulty, quite poor. There's not enough data across smallholder value chains in most emerging markets. And then that results in, I would say, poor claim settlements because you don't have enough data. So you don't know how to settle the claim, what claims are being settled. That results in poor confidence in the insurance product. If farmers don't get their claims, then why are they getting insured? And that results in further poor coverage and therefore further making the affordability of insurance. It's really a vicious sort of circle, and one could address it from any angle. Either making it getting enough data on the ground or having better analytics around risk assessments. One could address it from all of this. There are few innovations that are being talked about in the space, and the particularly one that is really exciting from at least the Indian subcontinent standpoint, particularly India, is this proliferation of ag tech, the agri-tech companies and their partnerships with fintech companies. And these are low-cost startup solutions, combining agri-tech solutions and fintech solutions to really look at getting ground-level data on smallholder agricultural practices, their risks, their risk profile, their the whole assessment, the whole ground analytics around what's happening in this agricultural sector. Now that can really open up pathways to getting more targeted insurance products, designed and delivered. And this is work in progress. The jury is not out yet if this is really a successful, model. But there are some examples in the region. There are investments being done. Rabobank, one of IFC's partners, has been very active in the space. IFC itself has been looking at agri-tech and fintech space in a big way to really understand the sector and really support some business models who are doing incredible work on the ground. Of course, one caveat, that data integrity, data confidentiality, these are concerns that need to be addressed. But of course, there is promise in this partnership between agri-tech and fintech to address this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harsh. This is very important. Actually, we are passing through this pandemic. The pandemic actually, if we look at anything positive from this devastating pandemic, the positive thing is digitalization and our use of the digital technologies, whether it is for, in all types of, in all sectors. So there is a sort of increasing emphasis on digital transformation. And COVID-19 probably accelerated it. And Dr. Fong has already touched on this, that Vietnam is actually looking at digital transformation as a key initiative. In that context, in agriculture itself, what are Vietnam's plans on digital transformation? And where can, either private sector or international organizations can really support or catalyze this digital transformation in Vietnam for agri-food systems? Dr. Fong, please.
Yes, thank you. It's a quite interesting questions. Currently, Vietnam now consider digitalization is one of the key policy for the whole economies, and particularly in agriculture sectors. As I mentioned, that would be important tools to get the inclusive development for the all the sector in the food system value chains. And to do so, Ministry of Agriculture have done some activities like we review and amended policies, a lot of policy during last couple of years. I think since 2018 to now, a lot of decrees and related regulation had been amended to support for the more involvement of the private sector. And we also amending the law for the FDI investment into more responsible investment of the private sector when they invest in agriculture. And a lot of initiatives already developed, as I mentioned before. One is Food Innovation Hub is a new one. But before that, we have developed the model of Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture in Vietnam, PSAV, with the support from the World Economic Forum and the Grow Asia. This model is a forum that led the private sectors, international donors and the policy makers in agriculture sector to sit together to sharing the ideas on green agriculture developments. And so far, about 8 sectors, 8 task force of 8 sectors have been developed in Vietnam and working very well, achieve a lot of successful achievement in terms of developing the green agriculture, applying good practice, farming practice in Vietnam. And we also jointly developing a lot of proposal with other partners for the funds. As you mentioned before, we have a lot of funds for climate resilience, like a Green Climate Fund or Environment Fund and GEF and so on. And with support from international partners and also the involvement of private sector, I believe that those proposals will be successful and feasible and also inclusive for the agriculture sector in futures. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, building on that, actually, I would like to address, the international organization like FAO. FAO is responding to COVID-19 recovery as well as, of course, agricultural adaptation. So in terms of priorities for FAO, how is FAO treating this digital transformation of agri-food systems as an opportunity in response to this climate change as well as COVID-19? Any views from you, Olga, please?
Yes, definitely. It's a big priority for FAO, and at the global level and also at the regional and country level, FAO is implementing projects which target the digital transformation of agri-food systems. And recently, FAO has launched a global initiative, a flagship initiative called Hand in Hand. And as part of this initiative, and as part of the COVID recovery process, FAO is supporting the Asia region and many countries in the East Asia, Southeast Asia, under the program which is called Data for Decision Making. And you can find, of course, information, more detailed information about it, but in brief, this program is aimed to help governments of the countries to use more innovative approaches to data collection, data analysis, and development of outputs useful for decision making in the agriculture sector. And using the big data as well as the Earth observation technologies for these purposes. And of course, this is also covering the COVID-19 impact data and its impact to the agriculture sector and how it can be used to target the recovery activities in a better way. At the global level, I would also like to mention that recently FAO has launched their hand-in-hand GIS-based platform, which is an online tool, can be accessed. It's an open access, can be accessed by anyone, and it provides an opportunity to analyze and access data of different types, so including socioeconomic, agriculture production related, climatic, and COVID impact data as well at the country level. So this is a short overview, and indeed it's a big priority for FAO at the moment.
Thank you, Olga. That's good that FAO is launching new initiatives in support of digital transformation. So, I mean, actually, we have only 5 minutes, and there is one general question in the chat box. It's mainly talking about how can we really help in terms of help the farmers in terms of better production, and also getting a better price in terms of exports. I mean, this is a sort of a big challenge, I mean, being faced by many farmers in the region. But if some of our panel members would like to respond, I mean, basically, what else can be done to support our farmers to get a better price, but at the same time, to ensure that they are not really going towards unsustainable farming system, either in terms of fertilizers or something. Maybe, I mean, because we have limited time, may I request each of you just to talk about for 1 minute only, maybe starting with Dr. Parisak. What is your final message to help our farmers?
Price is an external factor, really, right? I mean, there's not much we can do with it. It goes up and down. But as far as one example in FDI contract farming, we had a lot of problems with the contractual arrangement because it was done directly between the groups of farmers and the investor. And then we came up with new rules, regulations, and very strict ones. So and the government is a third party, you know, helping to mediate things like that. So then we set sort of the minimum price, and which has to be negotiated with, you know, with the investor, right? And it works, you know. And we also negotiated that they have to bring quality investment and also quality innovation, like sugarcane in the upland. So the Chinese, the Vietnamese, they're bringing what we call the sloping land technology, using biofertilizer, no chemicals anymore. But this has to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. I'm not saying this is happening, but the government can help. Yeah, the government can help, right? So this is one experience.
Thank you. Okay, I mean, next I would like to request Dr. Suryan, one final comment on how do we help our farmers?
Yes, as I said, we need to maintain functionality of food systems, agri-food system, through the inclusive value chain. I think the bottom line here, we would like to see the sharing mechanism of risk and benefit. I think the good price is not necessarily high price, but it's a fair price. So we need to look into ways in which we can ensure that the value chain does provide a good benefit sharing. And as I said, the consumer has a choice to make. All the stakeholders need to ensure that they offer good share, responsibility, risk, and benefit sharing. I think these are the bottom line of how the whole thing will work. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Olga, your final comment on this?
Yes, thank you. Perhaps I would look at it a little bit from a different angle, in sense that what could be the recommendations to the governments to help the farmers. And one of the findings of our research, and I think it supports really well what has been said in this panel, was that the providers of the funds which we assessed, the main providers were bilateral donors at 74%, then multilateral development banks, then other multilateral organizations, and about 1% comes from the private sector. So indeed, this is a big opportunity to engage with the private sector and attract investment from the private sector. And I strongly agree with everything what has been said about how it can be improved. And would like only to add 2 points. One, I think that the improvement of the monitoring and evaluation system for both mitigation and adaptation is very important. So we need to have also the frameworks to assess what was the impact, to track the impact of adaptation in agriculture sector in a quantitative way. And not only because we already have, let's say we're advanced in terms of mitigation, but adaptation tracking, tracking methodologies for tracking impact of adaptation are quite, I think, are lacking still. And the second one is to communicate our priorities and also needs, financial needs, in a very transparent and clear way in the country's NDCs. And this is now very relevant considering the new cycle of NDCs. And this will also be a push, I think, at the global scale coming from the Standing Committee of Finance, which is currently discussing the methodologies used to assess the needs. So accounting methodologies used to come to the conclusions, what are the needs. So it would need to be improved and very, let's say, clear and transparent.
Thank you. I mean, they are very, very useful suggestions. We need to work a lot on those, both in terms of adaptation tracking methodologies as well as clear data on our requirements. Dr. Fong, final view?
Yes. Yeah, so many things to discuss, and actually I totally agree with the points that all the panelists already mentioned. For Vietnam, we have some more different points, but I think we also share with the others. The first one is our minister now. He always mentions in every meeting and all of the workshops that we need to develop the cooperatives. As Dr. Suryan from Mekong Institute already mentioned, this will be the base for all of the development, for all of the innovation adaptations. And in Vietnam now, strategy is not only focused on the smart agriculture, but we also start talking about the smart villages, smart communes to develop in the futures. And in overall, we need to enabling a policy environment for the inclusive development of all those actors in the food system change. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fong. This is very important. Smart communes and smart villages, that is the way to go. Harsh, please. Sorry. Harsh.
Sure.
Any final thoughts?
Sure. I would say to support smallholders, one needs to really look at ways to incentivize climate smart agriculture. And that could be done through calibrating risk and reward throughout the value chain. So really making smallholders a participant in the benefits from climate smart agriculture, and also taking care of the risks that emerges from climate change. That would be something that could be done with, of course, private sector participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh. I mean, they are very useful. I think actually we are already 3 minutes excess of our allocated time, but I will try to just, it is very difficult to summarize all points, but I want to go with the 3 key messages from this event. One is that our agri-food systems still, they need to go through further transformations, whether it is in terms of institutions, policies, technologies, or even the behavior of actors that you all mentioned, behavior of consumer, behavior of stakeholders along the value chain. The transformation is necessary all along, but it's not easy to come about, but we need to aim, if at all we can align the whole agri-food systems to be aligned with this Paris Agreement, both in terms of mitigation or adaptation or even sustainable development goals. The second point is in terms of financing and technology. This is one thing that where, I mean, you all gave nice suggestions on improving the quality of data, etc. Important thing is still we all understand and agree that more financing is required if our agriculture has to, our agri-food systems have to adapt better to climate change. So how to mobilize more finance and how to deploy more relevant technologies will continue to be a challenge, and we all need to work together on this. The third point is that this is again identified for a long time, but not made big difference, the role of private sector in the transformation. I mean, as was pointed out earlier, there is a lot of, there's a lot of scope to improve the role of private sector. And already there are many innovative initiatives going on. It is not that we don't have the initiatives, but it is the scale that is what is required. And how best we can really engage the private sector in risk sharing and also benefit the consumer as well as the producer through fair price, etc., that Dr. Suryan has mentioned. Probably we are not pricing our food at an appropriate way. So maybe, basically we are going for a cheaper product, so which is actually devastating the whole ecosystem. So this is where, the issue of fair price and producer responsibility, consumer responsibility, all that counts. So those are my, there is a rich discussion. We sincerely thank all the panel members for their frank expression of their views. I think, we learned a lot, and maybe, it's difficult to summarize everything, and but I think we learned, and there is a lot to do in future. So with that, maybe we could conclude for this side event. Once again, I wish to thank all the panel members and also our participants. We had around the maximum number around 70. So now still there are around 60 participants, which is good, I think. So we thank each of you, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.